How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another installment of Tech Support Thursday. I actually completely forgot about it. My day was kind of busy. So we're going to go through this kind of shotgun style. I actually just finished working out, which is why I've got a hat on my head. So pardon me while I silence my phone. Didn't expect people to start pinging me. But it is normally after the time I would record a video. So I'm going to start off with this question and work my way up. I feel like I'm starting to catch up, which is good. Well, this is a long one. So if I look a little funny, I actually bought one of those under the desk exercise pedalers off of Amazon, and I'm sitting on a bar stool so that I can pedal while I'm sitting here. So if it looks like I'm rocking back and forth, it's because I'm pedaling. But I'm trying to, find some way to stay semi-active while I sit in front of a computer all day long. So I realized that multiple system integrator companies, their engineers have templates for implementation and configuration of new devices. So what ends up happening is they apply these templates almost copy-paste with changing the IP addresses, port names, VLAN configuration, and so on. And hence, I'm worried that an implementation role would not teach me much with these templates. Do you agree or not? So we'll stop with question one. Absolutely not. I do not agree with that at all. In order for you to build that template, you have to understand what the template's doing. And typically speaking, templates are only going to be leveraged in cases where you have a lot of repetitive configuration. So this would be one of the very few use cases, in my opinion, where potentially an automation capability might be useful. Python, Ansible, whatever you want to plug in. So that's where that would come into play. So no, I don't agree with that at all. So can you build a template? So I'll talk about a couple of scenarios. So I did build some templates for things that I was doing consistently on a regular basis, like VXLAN eBPN on Nexus 9 case. I did a lot of VXLAN eBPN, and that forced me to go through, and every deployment was a little bit differently. Different VLANs, different naming conventions, different design. So sometimes it was your standard design where you'd have a spine, you'd have leafs, you'd have a border to get traffic from the LAN into your fabric, things like that. Sometimes there was a migration aspect of it too, where you'd have to do like a back-to-back VPC from that set of 9Ks to maybe an old set of 7Ks or 5Ks where the old environment sat. There was all kinds of different scenarios that I would have to engineer around and come up with solutions in order to get the job done. So in those cases, you can templatize big chunks of it, but and then you're modifying it. But there are going to be scenarios where you can't. So I can think of two big projects that I worked on last year where I spent the majority of my time doing nothing but pulling up a config script in Notepad, and all I was doing was changing, what was it? It's been like a year since I've done it, so I don't remember exactly what we were doing. We had like a template we would go through, and we'd have to change some variables around. The naming convention, we were going from one type of switch to another. I think a 3800 to a 9300 or 9200 switch. So we would have to make certain adjustments, things like that. But we had a template, and then we also had an Excel spreadsheet that had the 15 things that we had to go check on a regular basis. We had to log in ahead of time. We had to pull the MAC address tables. We had to pull the VLAN database to make sure that whatever port was configured on the existing switch would line up on the new switch, MAC address mappings, all those type of things. And part of my job as one of the lead engineers was to go through, and if I saw something that could be optimized or modified to make my job or the people on site doing the work easier, that was my call. I'd have to reach out to the engineering team and be like, hey, I'm seeing this. Do you guys have a problem with me making this change? 95 times out of probably 100, we didn't have any issues. They were like, yep, go ahead. They would just trust our judgment and go from there. So that is what the template is, what makes the deployment easy. So actually, let me talk a little bit about how you go from the 80-20 rule a little bit. So what exactly do I mean by 80-20 rule? And actually, I need to stand up for a minute. My lower back is a little stiff from the workout. So what I mean by the 80-20 rule is that you spend 80% of your time doing the work that you need to do in order to be effective for the other 20%. So the actual implementation. Let me go ahead and raise my desk all the way up here. So you'd spend, let's say you take a 40-hour work week, and 80% of that's going to be 32 hours. The other 20% is going to be the 8 hours. It's an easy math, right? So if I was to go through and you were to say, hey, Rob, I have this project for you to go do. I need you to flip these 250, we'll say these 250 bank branches over from these 1 or 2 or potentially even 3 Catalyst 3800s over to Cat 9200s. Okay, cool. I'm going to have a litany of questions that I'm going to ask you simply for the fact that that's just how I am. What are we uplinking to? What do I need? Are they stacks? Are they not stacks? Are they going to be in the same location? I'm going to go through a bunch of questions just to get an idea of how I'm going to attack the configuration. The other thing I'm going to do is ask you, is there a template? Because if we're going to be doing that many switch deployments, I am not going to want to redesign or rebuild the wheel every time I go to a new branch. I'm not going to start over with a brand new config. I'm going to be taking an existing config and I'm just going to massage the parts of it that need to be retrofitted in order to fit into the new switch so that it's literally just a copy and paste. You're spending 80% of your time doing that. So that when you get to the deployment, you're spending only the necessary amount of time, the 20, deploying the configuration. And it's literally just a copy and paste. A lot of times I would send the config ahead of time to the engineer that would go on site. Their job was to do some basic stuff. They were to power the switch on, they were to plug in their USB drive, copy over the iOS image that the customer wanted to use, reboot the switch to make sure it came up on the right image, and then take the config that I had built for them and paste it into the config, or copy it into CLI, right? So you can take a very, very large number of sites and make it relatively straightforward and easy to deploy if you are efficient with your time. So, and I was doing 3 or 4 sites a week. You're doing, and it was 4 on average. It was 4 sites a week I was doing, but they were back to back. I'd have to wait for somebody to drive the half an hour or the 10 minutes up the road to the other bank branch and do the work. So it was the on-site person, it was a whole day of work for them. They'd get on-site at noon and they'd work until 7, 8 o'clock at night. But, we had it, the first couple were a little rough because you're trying to figure out all the specifics, right? There's little things that you have to play by ear. And then there were times where my nights would go long because you'd have to troubleshoot a problem. And then I'd have to give the engineer on call, the on-call engineer, or a jingle and be like, hey man, I'm running into this problem. Can you check your router? And I don't see the routes coming across via EIGRP. So, or the default route, I'm not pinging out to Google, or the user isn't able to open up this application. Everything looks fine from a layer 2 perspective, but I need you to take a look at something. And you would do those things, right? It's pretty straightforward. They had our numbers. We'd email ahead of time, call after, send text messages, that type of stuff. So you did what you had to do. Now, there was another deployment that I did. It was a very large VXLAN EVPN deployment over 3 different data centers. And my job was to go through and they were to migrate a legacy 7K, 5K, 2K design over to a VXLAN fabric. And it was really, really easy. The 7Ks were the edge of the network because they had the SOUP 2E cards in them at the time. And this was the old 7000 series, not the 7700. So the 5Ks were your distribution layer switch, and the 2Ks were just there for I'm not even sure why they had fabric extenders, to be honest with you, but they did. But anyway, the 7Ks is where the default gateway sat. So all we did is we did a back-to-back BPC between the 7Ks and the 9K leafs, and then we just systematically shut down the SPIs on the 7Ks and turned them up on the 9Ks. Fairly straightforward thing. You would just trunk it over via the port channel, and everybody was happy, right? It was a very easy migration, and it stayed like that for till we were done with the project. As a matter of fact, they were just like, okay, we're in the process of swinging cables for servers when we're comfortable moving them. Because it didn't matter, right? Because you could have a handful of servers sitting on the 7Ks or attached to either the 5K or the 2K, and then you could swing a couple servers. They had a lot of physical servers for whatever reason, or whether physical or virtual, and they were still bringing, they're swinging their ESXi hosts over via port channels, and they'd be like, hey, we need a configuration update for this particular switch, and we ask them for 3 or 4 parameters, and then we'd fire off an email with the text, like a notepad doc attached to a text file. Be like, okay, here's what you need to go do, right? It was very, very easy stuff, right? Now, all of that can be templated, but there's work that goes into templating, and yeah, that's how they make their money. If your system integrator is not efficient or able to work, efficiently on the project, they're going to start losing money. So you don't, and with all due respect to anybody watching this, you don't put people like CCNAs or only have a couple of years of experience that are going to be in over their heads and overwhelmed with a large deployment window and multiple locations. You don't put somebody like that in that position. They're the on-site person. They're the one handling the hands-on piece. You've got people like me that have over a decade of experience, that we've handled multiple projects like that. We know how to be efficient. We know the configuration. We know how to verify. We're quick on the CLI, and we're able to get move quickly through the project because of the fact that a lot of it's pattern recognition. When you really get down to brass tacks, it's pattern recognition. Are you able to identify what I'm looking at, and stuff like that. So that's what it really boils down to. Your second one is, I was advised that a troubleshooting role would teach me much more, especially when you work for an ISP with many customers and not a dedicated customer. You sometimes go in the case blind, not knowing much about the site infrastructure beforehand, and are expected to resolve the issue in a certain time frame. That's true. You just described Cisco TAC in a nutshell. That's exactly what TAC does. You call them up. I remember the last time I called TAC, well, I didn't call them. I told the customer to call them. I'm not, and I actually can't go into details. I signed a non-disclosure agreement on that particular customer, so I can't talk anything about what the actual problem was. But the customer, how do I explain this without going into any detail? The customer, it was the same customer I was just talking about with that large bank that we were doing the migrations for, but we had left the branches and we were at one of their main locations. And it was 10 switches? Yeah, 10 switches, and I had 2 days to get the config prep for them. So it was one of those things where I was kind of racing to get through it, and we had taken the same template, and I had a call with them. I said, okay, we're using the same template from the bank branches, right? And he's like, yep, we're still using that thing. I'm like, okay, cool. As long as we're on the same page. And so long story short, there were some things done on the customer side that were not communicated to us, the integrator, and I was working with one set of there was 2 on-site folks that I was working with, and another guy that I had worked with several times was working with another set of engineers from the customer side. So we were kind of divide and conquer. I was taking care of a stack of 4 switches. They were taking care of a stack of 3 or 4, I think. But they decided they were going to do a bunch of recabling. They were going to pull out a bunch of old Ethernet cables and put in a bunch of brand new ones. I was not aware this was happening. And we're going through the verification steps and on my stack because we were done. And because, I'd done 100 sites at this time, and so I was pretty efficient with what we were trying to do. So long story short, we ran into problems. and I'm sitting there. It wasn't until I started asking questions on a bridge. So they called my cell phone from the customer's conference room where they set up a war room because something was broke and they didn't know what to do. I started resolving issues once I started figuring out once they started explaining to me what the problems were. I started fixing things, and they didn't understand why certain things weren't working. And I said, okay, well, I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the config, and I'm like, well, I don't know, man. I'm like, it was the same model switch, that whole 9 yards. So I was like, I'm really not sure. I'm like, we've never had this problem before, so I don't know why we're having this issue now. We've done the exact same processes up to this point 100 times. So to me, it was the definition of insanity. So we're getting a different result, and I don't know why. So I said, do these switches have support? He said, yes, they do. I said, okay, call TAC. Tell him you have a Sev1 network down. And so he's just like, okay. So he got a hold of an engineer, and within 15 minutes of him getting on the phone with the engineer told him what to do to fix it. But he described, well, I'm the one that explained via the speakerphone, and he kind of just was like, okay, I have a third-party consultant working with us, and this is what he's seeing. And he's the one that told me to call. And he's just like, okay, so he asked the tech engineer, asked the customer engineer to ask me the specific output. I gave it to him, and he goes, okay, I know what your problem is. And he went, I ran a command globally on the switch, and boom, things just started magically working. I'm like, okay. So what that did is it raised a huge red flag for the customer, even though we got the network working again. So printers were printing, phones were registering, internet was accessing, all those type of things. The network was doing its job, but that raised a red flag for the customer, and we needed a post-mortem. Well, I didn't cause the outage, but I was part of trying to figure out why. And so I ended up getting on a call. So it was like 4 or 5 in the morning when I got done with that troubleshooting scenario. And so I went to bed. I got up around, was it 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning? And, I was on a call trying to figure out what was going on. And I was asked to explain what happened, or at least my take on it, give my statement, if you will. And so I went through the details, and they were like, oh, okay. And so, but it was like, it went all the way up to the company's VP of IT, because there was such a major outage. But it wasn't necessarily my fault that things went down. So it's just one of those things where, you're going to be thrusted into some things that you don't know what's wrong when you first get in there. If you have any interest in going after the CCA lab, you're not going to know what troubleshooting tickets are going to wait for you until you sit down at the console and you hit the start button. Now, to be fair, the new CCIs don't have a dedicated troubleshooting section anymore. It's design, then you have deploy, operate, optimize, I think is what they call it now. DOO. So you guys are going to luck out. But what they're going to do anyway is they're going to build in some BS into your exam, and you're going to have to go fix it. That's what they're going to do. They're going to integrate troubleshooting and some diagnostics that you're going to have to isolate the problem, stuff like that. So yeah, you're never. So troubleshooting is called troubleshooting for a reason. You're not always going to know what the problem is. They can describe a symptom to you, and then you can be like, oh, I know what the problem is, and then go figure it out. So would it be a wise choice to consider the troubleshooting position, because it seems like you'd teach me more before but you said before, learn how to have something up and running first before you learn how to break it to fix it. I did say that, and that is part of the learning process. So again, it goes back to my comment earlier about pattern recognition. It's one of those things where, how do you know how to, you can't troubleshoot something unless you know how it works correctly. So one of the things that I did a lot during my routing and switching preparation was I systematically would learn I would break everything. I would get everything fully running. I would build out a full topology, which, for example, is it this one? So take this topology, for example. I would go through this topology, get it fully built out, all kinds of nerd knobs and geek tweaks deployed on it, and then I would systematically break different parts of it intentionally. And then what I would do is, even though I'm the one that broke it, I would look for, okay, let me verify it. And then I would look for inconsistencies. What isn't showing up? What is showing up incorrectly? Or I would misconfigure something. And then I'd have to go back and like, okay, how would I pick that out if I didn't already know what was going on? And so by doing this, I was able to quickly ascertain, okay, I know what's going on here, I know what's going on there, so it's fairly straightforward for me to get those details dialed in and squared away. But that's the point of that's where to me the expert comes out, is you have the knowledge, right? You understand how the things work. That's part of it. But you know how to implement it. Now you need to go verify it's working correctly. Okay? You verified it's working correctly. Great. Now go fix it. Well, how do you know how to fix it? Well, you don't know how to fix it until you've broken it. So you have to go there and take a known good configuration, go either remove something to make it break, or incorrectly apply something that you know is not going to have anything to do with it, and then, or maybe it does, and then you learn something more. So it's one of those things where you either there's something missing to make the configuration finished. Like, for example, if you're trying to do a send community where you want to try to like a BGP well-known community of no export. Well, you configure the community in a route map and you apply it inbound on the BGP peering, but you don't actually do the send community. So there's going to be variables that you have to take into consideration that are going to, like, okay, oh, whoops, I forgot to do the send community command. You live and you learn. So it's one of those things where you learn how to do things as you're going through the deployments. So yes, it's one of those things where you're going to have to learn it, break it, see what happens when it's not working correctly, and then go fix it. So you see the before and after. So I remember my last attempt at route switch. I had it was a DMVPN ticket, and the issue, I won't get into specifically what the actual problem was because I honestly don't remember. But what I ended up doing was I checked the other two sites, and I checked the hub, and the other two sites were working fine. They were registered to the hub, and each site could see the other site's routes. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, here's a simple thing to do. Delete the old config and copy and paste in the new one. Take the known good configuration that you know is working and just paste it into the router that's not working. Even though technically that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to fix the line of configuration that's either missing or wrong. I was like, well, let me just do this. I still got the credit for it because it was working by the time I got done with it. That was the point. Can you always do that? Maybe, maybe not. So you just have to be smart about it when you're going through your config and trying that type of stuff out. So I think this is your last bullet point. So may I please know your input after explaining the scenario to you and your advice, which role you would recommend of the two. I'm not going to tell you which one you should take. It's like, I can't do that. That's up to you. So it's like, if I was to bring you two very attractive women, one's a blonde, one's a brunette, and one, which one do you want to date? I can't tell you which one to go for. I might think the brunette's a better pick for you because you might have brown hair, and that might be the one category that I choose to be a good fit for you. But you think you might have more in common with the blonde. I don't know. It's up to you. I can't make that decision for you. So I would definitely spend as much time troubleshooting as you can. I've never been in a dedicated troubleshooting position, so I can't really advise you one way or the other. Hopefully that answers your question, even though I'm not going to tell you which way to go. It's just like, that's up to you, man. I can't make that call for you. Very interesting to see troubleshooting work. Yep. I'm excited to see this content. Okay, yep. Let's see here. We really love how you go on a tangent and go off topic, so please keep it up. Yep, no problem. You You like the longer videos. Yeah, they're not bad. They just get really hard to record because they go on and on and on and on and on forever. Let me rephrase that. If you were to start over now and there are route switch EI track didn't exist, which would you security more than likely. I had an interview for a technical expert position, and I came across one interview question, and the interview stressed on. Apparently, the answer was BGP AS path list override feature. Is the AS path? Oh, so it's both. I think I've answered this question before. AS path override simply is it's on the provider side where you got two you had this two customer sites peering via BGP, and they're both using the same autonomous system number. And what you have to do is you have to go through and use AS override to remove the customer's AS from the AS path list and replace it with the provider's AS. And what ends up happening is you end up seeing the same AS twice. You see the provider's AS twice instead of the source AS, because eBGP loop prevention is you don't learn in a route from an AS that you already in, because you should have already learned that through IGP. Is complex VPNs a big part of SP-Trek? It is basically the whole point of service provider. Why is it hard to apply MPLS for the internet? I mean, from the SP network side, nothing would change due to the MPLS VPN or the BGP VPN before label. Not entirely. For example, I'm not going to say who I work for, but we are a MPLS provider. We just do everything via layer 2. We're just we only do Ethernet services. We don't do any layer 3 VPN unless there's a very unique use case for it, and we have to be able to provide undeniable justification that the customer needs to go layer 3 VPN versus layer 2 VPN. Because at the end of the day, who cares, right? It's whether it's routed or if it's switched. It's not hard at all. A lot of times you won't even see it. A lot of internet providers use MPLS in their backbones and their cores. It's easy to do fast reroute, loop free alternate, things like that. LFA. If you're doing segment routing, topology independent LFA or TI LFA. So yeah, it's fairly simple to do that type of stuff nowadays. So it's so yeah, not hard at all. Hardest BGP feature that you came across in your studies. Feature-wise, I think probably the one that's always messed with me the most is going to be conditional route advertisement. Whether you have an advertised map and an exist map or a non-exist map, and it's just the logic. It always screws with me. I don't know why. Excuse me. So yeah, there's that. Let's see here. River fishing. Oh yeah, I forgot to turn that off. Very nice. This episode had questions related to each other, and I like the IBGP route reflector explanation. I study and work with route reflectors. I just thought there's more to it from the ISP core side when deploying it, but it turns out similar to normal IBGP route reflector. Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about route reflection with IBGP is it doesn't matter what address family you're using, whether it's IPv4, unicast, multicast, VPN-v4, VPN-v6, layer 2 eVPN, multicast VPN, multicast MDT, depending on which profile you're using for multicast. It's all the same logic, right? IBGP has a requirement. You either can do a full mesh or you can do route reflection. So that's it. I mean, there's really nothing more to it. It's not some sort of overly complicated design that you need to take into consideration. Are there scenarios where you would need to go through and do like hierarchical route reflectors? Yes. An example of that would be you've got a set of routers in a geographic area. Take the southeast of the U.S., for example. Let's say you've got 2 routers in Georgia, 2 routers in Florida, and 2 routers in Alabama, and they're all interconnected. You know, we're not in a full mesh. We're in a big ring, A lot of fiber ran in the ground. So none of the routers themselves are wired to each other. But what you do is you do /31 point to point between each of the routers, and each one has a /32 loopback on it. And you inside, let's say in one in Florida and one in Georgia, are your route reflectors. Well, you use IGP routing in order for the route reflectors in order to peer with all the routers. The two in Alabama, the two in Georgia, the two in Florida, and then on the edge of Alabama and Georgia, you that's one geographic area. Let's say you move up to the Carolinas and you move west towards like Arkansas and Mississippi and things like that, and you start adding more routers. Well, you regionalize your route reflector design. So, but on the edge, it'd be two different autonomous systems. They could be confederations or they may not be confederations, but you end up taking the peerings from the routers in Alabama and the routers in Arkansas, you peer them to each other, and the routers from Arkansas, Mississippi, and let's say Oklahoma, for example, Louisiana, you get this big connection. They're all point-to-point connected, and there's fiber connecting Louisiana and Georgia, or I'm sorry, yeah, Alabama together, and there's route reflection inside of the other, your Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi region, and there's route reflection there. So everybody's got a full copy of the full BGP table, but the thing is, those are your regionals, and maybe then in the middle of the country you have 25 or 30 routers that are spread across the country that are used as your backbone to connect all your regions together. And then you have route reflectors in your core. And so are you going to connect your route reflectors in your core to your route reflectors in your regions? No, you're not. You're not going to do that. Unless there's a specific thing, there's specific designs where you would, like inter-AS option C, if you're doing something like that for MPLS Layer 3 VPN. But most of the time you're not going to do that. You're going to rely on just normal BGP or eBGP peerings with your regional POPs and go that direction. So, but again, that's not the only way to do that, right? There's multiple ways that you can skin that cat. It's just that's the way that most service providers do their design. So it's just one of those things where if you understand how IBGP, what the requirements are, either full mesh or route reflection, doesn't matter the size or the scale. It just makes sure that as long as you are meeting those requirements, BGP is going to do its job. So, may you please advise if someone is studying for the CCIE, let's say someone is good with completely lost beginner Python. I think I answered this question a while back. I think my opinion on is that it's a waste of time for automation, but do what you got to do. How did you practice study SDA section? I didn't have to because SDA wasn't in my lab. What was the toughest section for your CCIE exam all 3 times? And the toughest section in the exams you passed in? Troubleshooting was probably the most difficult of all 3 because you had to fix everything and you couldn't, there was a lot of exam and task level restrictions to do what you needed to do. What made you learn Postman? I needed to deploy a lot of stuff very quickly, and deployment schedules and the amount of work that I had to go do basically forced my hand. I mean, I didn't mind Postman. I had no problem installing it, and then I worked with a lady that was really good at it, and she sent me some scripts, and Postman was easy to work with, and once I read the scripts, I was like, oh, this is easy. Where did you learn Postman from? A lady that I worked with. Hope you'd answer the older questions. I'm working my way through it. So, restarting the DMVPN hubs fixed the issue. Yes, it did. The crypto process was stuck. LACP couldn't form due to high CPU utilization. Wow, never heard of that. I wonder how you reached that conclusion. Simple. The LACP would keep flapping. You'd console into the switch, and it would just keep bouncing every 5 minutes or whatever the timeout is, and it was connecting a pair of 2 line cards on a 6509 down to a 3750 stack, I think. It's been like 10 years since I've troubleshot that, but Anyway, long story short, it was just going. I had them plug into the old switch. I configured static port channel. I pulled LACP off, configured a static port channel on the 3700s, and did the exact same on the 6500s. I brought it back online, and then I said, I can't troubleshoot the high CPU with you, but what I can do is recommend you, if you don't already have support on the switches, get them on SmartNet so we can call TAC and have them dig into it. And we ended up selling them SmartNet later that day. Sent the PO over. What do you do when you have no clue what the syslog alert message means? Google it, ask a colleague, because sometimes I come across very weird syslog unusual alert messages. That's what the Googles are for. You can sometimes do a MIB walk, or is it SNMP walk? One of the two. You can do that and pull the information from that. May you elaborate on why the root bridge should be the default gateway? My mind can wrap the relevance around this point, or what's the correlation between both features? Well, typically speaking, your root bridge is going to be where you're doing all of your, what do you call it? If you're doing rapid spanning tree, it makes the most sense to put your distribution switch as your default gateway, and also be your root bridge. It's a Cisco best practice. So that's why you do what you do. You don't have your spanning tree root bridge sitting on a lower powered, old school design was you don't have a 6509 sitting in your distribution or your collapsed core doing all your routing and layer in your gateways, and then have your root bridge sitting on a low power 2950 switch. Go back 10-15 years ago, and processing power isn't what it was back then as it is today. So what you would end up doing is, and I can't tell you how many times I've walked into an environment and the root bridge is sitting on some really old 2950, because the engineers don't understand the concept of spanning tree, and they wonder why things are running slow. Well, the network takes forever to converge. Well, because your root bridge is sitting on a switch that's not capable of doing the job you need it to do. That's why it's a best practice. So it makes sense. You put your root bridge and your gateway on the same device, and then you do whatever your HSRP or VRRP backup is. You have that device as your backup root bridge. I mean, that's really it. I mean, if you read the documentation on it, it goes into some detail on it, but at the end of the day, that's just it's best practice, and I don't argue it. Thanks for calling out the automation BS, Rob. I feel like I'm going crazy living in some kind of weird conspiracy the past few years, the way people are pushing it. While cool and interesting, it doesn't translate over to networking well, where you can potentially destroy the very transport the automation source is using to program things. Time is much better spent learning network design, protocols, and services rather than programming in this job. 99% of the customers have no business using it. I completely agree with you. I want a server with native NVMe PCIe 4 support. Bit expensive. I saw semi-budget one, Dell R640, 768 gigs of RAM, 7.68 terabyte PCIe 4.0 drives, 2x22 core Gold processors. Is it overkill at around 4,500? I want to run almost all in one and not worry about limitation, fast boots, OS loads, like DNAC, SD-WAN, SDI, CUCM, etc., and future proof. That would be that's basically what I've got here, except for I'm running on a Cisco C240. I'm running dual 22 core CPUs that are Intel Gold. It's got 384 gigs of RAM. It started with 128, and I added 256 to it. The server runs like a dream, but I intentionally sized it to do that. Now I'm not running NVMe. I'm running a standard. I have a, what do I have in here for storage? Data store 1. storage. Non-SSD. So this guy right here, this is I think it's Western Digital Red? Black? I think it's a Western Digital drive. It's an 8 terabyte drive though. And it works just fine. I've got no problems with it. And then I have my other storage adapter here is QNAP. Allows me to do iSCSI. And so, but I got a lot of stuff sitting on it, so I just connect it to the server because I can. But yeah, I think this server cost me 1,500, 15, 16, 17, almost 1,800 when you add in the additional store. No, probably closer to 2,000 now that I think about it. 1,500 for the server, baseline 128 gigs of RAM, no drive. I had to go spend I think $100 on the drive, and then another $200 or $300 on RAM. So it came to be about $2,000. So if you can get, where'd it go? So if you can get 2 by PCIe 4 drive, that's a little on the expensive side, but you would pretty much be able to run whatever you want. The one thing I will warn you though is when you start getting into bigger workloads like DNAC and SD-WAN, SDA is going to fall inside of DNAC as far as I know. I've never actually deployed it. But if you get DNAC and SD-WAN going, you're going to start seeing the CPU climb quite a bit. So I should be able to run DNAC and ICE pretty easily. Now I've got 5 servers running on here that are in FMC, but and I'm chewing up 100 gigs of RAM and 20% of my CPU. So I could conceivably run DNA Center here as well if I wanted to. I've just never taken the time to try to boot it up. So that wouldn't be bad. It seems a little high, but I would keep. I don't think you need quite that much RAM, but I would see. But you're looking for specific. You're looking for NVMe. You're looking for Flash, enterprise Flash. So that's what my computer, the one that I'm recording on, has an NVMe drive in it. I don't have it. I've got a. What is it? 256 gigs. This PC. Yeah, so 256 gig drive is my main drive, and then I've got 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, and 1 3 terabyte drives inserted, plus another 7-ish terabytes of NFS storage through the QNAP appliance. I've got 2 4 terabyte drives in it that I've got bonded together through a RAID. So, can someone point what images are used iNet? Oh, I forgot to answer this one. So it's going to be, where'd he go? Oh, yes, it's going to be iOS V. So these AMAs are awesome. The detailed depths and tangents are really pushing me to stay on top of my studies and try to deep as well as for my CCIE. They're motivating. Good deal, man. Appreciate it. So we're pretty much caught up. So let me answer these last couple ones since I'm right here. With being a network architect, are you more high-level design, or do you still get to deep dive into the weeds of the technology? It seems that the standard career progression is admin, engineer, architect. However, many architect positions seem to be high-level design and direction and less keyboard-focused. While going through the different certification tracks, you learn how to implement a particular technology, and just by nature of understanding the technology, you can make some design decisions. And when it comes to building out a scalable network architecture, firewall design and placement, segmentation, routing, etc., do you have any good resource recommendations for improving on those skills? I'm guessing that's what the CCDE is all about. It is for the most part. You have to understand the main point, and you already called it out, is understanding how the technology works. You can't architect something you don't understand. It's like you can't automate something you don't already understand. You can't design a network for a set of criteria if you don't understand how the technologies work. So that's why it's important to have a technical background before you get into if you're going to be doing network architecture. So now, do you need to go and like for example, if you're a user experience or a UI or UX um, architect, that's all making things look pretty, right? That's not what I do. I'm My goal is to understand where the customer's trying to go with whatever they're doing. If they want to migrate from A to B, how do we get them there without blowing things up? That's where my job comes into play. So apparently you guys like. So do I have a design book? So the best book I could recommend to you would be for you to go read the CCD V3 OCG by Zig Ziglar. He's a good buddy of mine. So that's what I would recommend. What is your opinion on using Stagwise Virtual in the core or distribution versus using FHRP? Anytime I can use Stackwise Virtual to get away from a first hop redundancy protocol, I always will. Chassis aggregation is and virtualization to me is a great thing, and you get more flexibility out of it than you would if you were just using some sort of first hop redundancy protocol. So I'm always going to go Stackwise over FHRP. You need more metal face when playing. I know. So we're at the very last here, so I'm going to go ahead and knock these out. In a PE to CE connection, why do customers usually have an IGP? Why don't they keep the connection as static? I understand that part of it is an agreement with the ISP, but I've never seen a customer in all my work with ISPs connected to the PE by a static connection. Wouldn't it be easier for the customer? It would, and it depends on who's running that device. Most deployments that I've seen, it's customer premise equipment that the provider manages, meaning you got guys like me that know how to do this stuff, and it's usually a BGP peering. It's the easiest way to roll it out. Gives you a lot of route control. Why do a lot of customers use IGP? Because there's a lot of people out there that don't know BGP. Like even basics, like forming a BGP peering. I can't tell you how many times to me it's easy. I've done it thousands of times. I would do a peering via BGP before I would do a peering via OSPF or EIG or peer RIP. That's just me though. I'm comfortable with it. But a lot of customers are OSPF or EIGRP because they're customers and they know their IGP because that's the environment that they work in. A lot of people out there in the wild doing network engineering, they're a network engineer by title, but they might only have a CCNA level understanding of routing protocols. So, but 25 years of experience. So, you take what you work with what you've got. So that's why, and it's a case by case basis. So every scenario, I've seen all kinds of different scenarios, but at the end of the day, it's you put into play what you know. A lot of the times, you stay inside your comfort zone, because if something breaks, you need to know how to troubleshoot it. Because you don't want to be trying to figure out something at 3 a.m. when something's broke and don't know why the BGP peering is not coming online. No one wants to be up at 3 a.m. trying to learn something for the first time, especially in a troubleshooting scenario. It's one thing if you can't sleep and you're reading a book. That's a different story. How would a pseudo SD-WAN like scenario work using IPSLA to track the primary router? That if it has packet drops, latency utilization, the HSRP would change to the backup router. May you please briefly. So the basics to it is this: you create an IPSLA instance that tracks, and I don't know the exact syntax, but the most common one that I've seen is going to be an ICMP echo. But you can also track other things with that. Now, tracking itself is just going to associate itself to an IPSLA. IPSLA is going to be able to track jitter, delay. There's some things that you can put into play there, but the bottom line here is when I say pseudo SD-WAN, there's like actual probes that are going across to test it and to keep track of the latency and the delay. You really can't mimic that with IPSLA. It's either you have SD-WAN or you don't. So I would definitely say that if you're trying to do work some wizardry to get SD-WAN like failover, you can make it the failover process, make it pretty straightforward. And I've done that hundreds of times. You create an SLA instance to track the next hop IP, and or some IP address on the internet that you would normally be able to ping on a regular basis, and then as you associate the tracking object or the SLA to a tracking object, and then underneath HSRP you would track you would track reachability, and I'm trying to remember the config that I would use, but that's what you would end up doing. So can you take it a step further? Yeah, you can. One second here. Cisco IP SLA configuration. This is a bit older, but at least it'll have some configuration examples. So what am I looking for here? DNS. Yeah, so you can do something like this, where you have, yeah, so you can do jitter, packet loss, round trip timeout, connection loss, path jitter. So you can add in some of these variables. So if you hit a threshold, you have to set the threshold. Syslog. So IPL say reaction trigger, operation number, target operation. So you would do jitter, average, threshold. Let's see what the actual syntax is down here at the bottom. So you would do IPSLA reaction configuration 10, react the so react, if you don't know what MOS is the mean opinion score. It's a voice thing. So I believe the best you can have is a 5. The lowest you can have is a 1. Threshold type immediate, threshold value 490, 250, action type trap only. So it would send a notification out if something was to happen, and you have these thresholds. So this would be probably as close, maybe. Round trip timeout threshold, immediate, trap only. I don't know if it will actually take it down per se, but it would like generate an alert and say, hey man, you guys have problems. And this one here is literally doing, you're going to say to this IP address on this particular port using codec G7LA ALAW. That's a voice codec. That's how you do voice encapsulation of voice traffic. That's the particular codec they're using. There's G711 and G729. So these are going to be some things that you would want to take into consideration when you're doing your configuration. Have I ever gotten to this level of depth? No. No customer I've ever worked with ever gets to that level of depth when it comes to SLAs. Most of the time we are doing, where is it? ICMP echo right here. So the ICMP echo that we're looking to do is very, very simple. We SLA operation number, ICMP echo, the destination IP address, and that is it. How often do we want to ping it? That's it. That's all. In 99% of the time, that's what we're doing. How can you add in other things? You can add in data pattern, history. I've never done any of this extra stuff though. So you can add in a whole bunch of variables to this type of service, traffic class, all that type of stuff, all that, and then schedule it. And the config looks something like this, where now this is just the SLA. This doesn't include anything else. And then you scheduled it, right? So you're essentially saying, I want you to ping this IP address from this IP address, So they're on the same subnet. So it's basically the next hop up. And then you are going to ping it every 300 milliseconds. The timeout is 2 seconds, I think. Sure, we'll go with that. And then what you do is, once it's been scheduled, it'll start pinging that IP address every 300 milliseconds or whatever. And if it misses, let's say 8, almost 9 would be 2100. So, sorry, no, 6 would be 1800, 7 would be 2100. So, if you miss 7 pings, the timeout is going to time out after 2 seconds, and then it will, if the SLA goes down, you would associate this to a tracking object. So you do, say, track 1, track 10, whatever it's going to be, IP SLA reachability, right? So you can't reach it, it's going to be reachability. So it's the IP SLA first, then the tracking object, and then you're going to associate the tracking to something, whether it's a static route or HSRP, or if you're on Nexus, the VPC configuration. But I really don't recommend you doing that because it actually takes the VPC down. I ran into that in production, and that was a bad day for me. I had to learn something very, very quickly. So that's, I know you said not the detailed configuration, but that's essentially what you the breakdown for that. So, but then again, you're trying to essentially do SD-WAN like features on a non-SD-WAN device. Because you got to remember, SD-WAN most of the time runs BFD over the IPsec tunnels and for fast failure detection, but there's also application level checks like latency, jitter, packet drops. So it's looking for things that you're more than likely not going to be able to configure on a router. So just keep those things in mind. So with that being said, I am working on, for this comment here, I am working on a new training site where I'll be taking anything moving forward with YouTube for the Cisco Enterprise Track video series, as well as service provider, SD-WAN, anything security that I do, or I'm looking at my whiteboard, data center, Nexus, VMware, that type of stuff, any cloud. I'm going to be putting that on my training site for anything course material, where there's multiple videos going into a course. That's going to be going on the training site that I'm in the process of developing. The workbooks will be going up on them as well. So once it goes live, I'll give you guys more of a detailed breakdown on that. And then there'll be a monthly membership that you guys can join. Because I've had several people reach out to me and be like, I can't join through YouTube, but so I figured it's a one-stop shop if I go through my own dedicated training site and stuff like that over the course of time. So with that being said, I'm at an hour. I'm kind of tired of talking. So I will catch all of you guys in the next video. Tomorrow, don't forget tomorrow, which is Friday, I will be doing at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time, 7 p.m., I'll be doing the coaching session. So if you guys are interested in hanging out with me, if you're a paid member of the channel, either through the channel or through Patreon, you should be able to join that. There will be a Microsoft Teams call that'll go along with that. Excuse me. And we'll be able to chat for about an hour. We're going to be covering next generation multicast VPNs in the service provider track. So actually, it'll be not on this topology. It'll be on this one, but not that important. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for stopping by and hanging out with me. And if you haven't already done so, please like, share, and subscribe. Put your feedback and your comments down in the comment section below. In the description, there will be a link to the Patreon for membership to the channel if you want to join the coaching sessions, as well as a link to the sample workbook and the Patreon link to the actual workbook. So, which is $50. Somebody had mentioned that again. It's selling the enterprise workbook for $50. Well, once you buy it, it's yours. You don't need to go buy it again. So, with that being said, I want to thank you guys for stopping by and hanging out with me, and I'll catch all of you guys later in the next video. Have a good one, everybody.